Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. I have a really cool review for you guys from the brand Christopher Ward. A little about them: they're out of London in the UK, and they're an independent brand that grew up from a niche micro brand. In terms of the type of watch, this is a dive watch. Some key comm characteristics in design language. You're looking for a diver. Of course, you're going to want something that is going to have water resistance, typically some type of screw down crown, something that's tough, legible, with a dive time bezel and a diver extension is always nice if on bracelet. This is their C60 Trident Pro 300 in 40 millimeters in the blue colorway, and it's a relatively new ultra wearable trident that's slimmer and lighter on the wrist, with a two-part unidirectional bezel that's re-engineered in terms of its click mechanism, and it also features a fully lumed ceramic bezel insert. Also, it has larger indexes with increased lume and a dial that showcases their twin flags logo. Available in 3 case sizes and 4 colors, with the option of a redesigned bracelet or quick release strap. Plus, it actually has an exhibition case back now and water resistance of 300 meters. You can get this for $1,095 as configured here on the batter bracelet. And yeah, this is the 40 millimeter model, and I'm excited to share it with you guys. If you guys are fans of the channel long term, you know I've really have featured Christopher Ward since the very beginning of the channel about 10 years ago, and I featured quite a few different iterations. So it's nice to get this most current one in. I know typically I was covering kind of every new release, whether from the Mark 1 to Mark 2 to Mark 3, but I think they finally have found a bit of a sweet spot to where they're not really needing to do such, I think, bold updates. And I think they've kind of found their real resting place for this timepiece, to where they can really just do incremental changes and, you know, kind of transition this from being such a contemporary diver into something that I think has some longevity in terms of finding its own way as a bit of a modern classic. So with that said, let's go and zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay guys, so as you can see, very, very handsome, and we know that Christopher Ward has been making a lot of waves as of late, but I will say they did come from very humble beginnings. Check this out. Not quite a Gen 1. I would consider this probably like a Gen 1.5, because they did update the blue to be this brighter blue and change the logo to be basically shortened to be CHR.Ward versus fully spelled out as Christopher Ward in the true first generation. But this is a good representation of kind of where they start out. And the funny thing is, at this point, something like this is actually starting to become quite retro. I mean, it's only a matter of time, probably give it another 10 years, and this would be considered neo-vintage, which I think is really interesting. And it was pretty well spec'd for the times, you know, back in those early 2000s. And I have to say that, yeah, I think these have been, you know, quite a staple. Maybe not quite industry leading in the early days, but definitely have had a presence for a very long time. And you can see here, this is the original size, and these were originally, you can see there, 300 meters, quite competitive. Eventually they went up to 600 meters. I have a full kind of evolution of the Christopher Ward C60 Trident, especially in the blue colorway, already existing on the channel, but now we have this, which I think is a newer kind of culmination of everything in terms of it hitting more of a sweet spot now at 40 millimeters. Now the previous, and unfortunately a little infamously on the channel, I compared the actual Mark III release, and it was the 40 versus the 42, and I preferred the 42. Not the overall dimensions, but the proportions just seemed more balanced. It had always been a 42 millimeter watch, and unfortunately when they sized it down, you could tell that they were just downsizing a larger watch versus designing something that really felt perfectly balanced as meant to be within the dimensions of a 40mm watch. I think they finally have done that here. So my kudos to Christopher Ward, because yeah, I know again, they've definitely been making some noise with models like the Bel Canto, with models like the 12, but I will say this is probably the most iconic in terms of Christopher Ward. I mean, the C60 Trident. I mean, this is really the watch that started it all. So let's get into it. So yeah, about $1,000, and honestly, they've been within this space for a while now at, you know, being one of the best values under $1,000. And now for $1,000, that's including the bracelet, of course, in terms of the configuration, and you're getting quick release. You're even getting flush fit screws, which is a really, really nice touch. And like I mentioned before, the nice thing is they're kind of in a state now to where any changes will be more design increments and not necessarily specs. So that worry that I kind of used to have with each release of the Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3 of kind of the watches feeling more outdated because there were actual quality things that changed versus just the style. Here, there's not too much further they can go in terms of up-speccing this anymore. I feel like the flush fit screw pin construction on the bracelet was kind of that last missing piece, and they had already had everything else. Of course, they refined now that dial layout with the Twin Flags logo, and of course they updated the specifications and the dimensions to really make sure that this 40mm felt quite balanced and proportional. So with that, let's get into those dimensions. 40mm in diameter, 11.3 millimeters thick, 47.4 millimeters lug to lug. It is full 316L stainless steel. It has a flat sapphire with an inner AR coating, so that's always nice to find. It does have a pretty unique bezel, so check this out. As I spin it here, take a look at that index there in the middle. It's actually stationary, so that 60-minute index is stationary, and you can essentially just move the numbers around it. So that is very different, but quite useful. I will say, because they kind of emboldened every 5 minutes or at every hour marker, it can kind of throw you off if you are going to be, you know, in a weird offset, let's say, and you're not starting perfectly off of a 5 minute. Right now, your brain is going to kind of have to reconcile offsetting the numbers with those spots. So I think if they would have just made it just the tick marks all the way around, since they're not following each one, I think, of course, if this section followed each 5 minute increment, then it would make sense. But I think at this point, it probably would have been cleaner in terms of the functional execution for readability if they would have just made that kind of equal line weights all the way through for the 60-minute index. But I'm glad that there is a 60-minute index, because that is one of the things that help with meeting those ISO standards. So very, very nice. And again, it feels fully functional like a tool watch. And then it's also elevated in terms of its build quality and construction that do approach, you know, some of those ideas of that a mid-tier Swiss kind of entry-level luxury space. And I think they do that. They definitely achieve that. The action is awesome. Listen to this. 120 clicks. Ooh. Beautiful blend of tactile clicks and just smoothness to operate. So sometimes when you have something that's very clicky, it can be quite harsh, and you don't necessarily want to touch it or use it or interact with it. You just kind of want to set it at 12 and leave it there. Here, you're going to be invited to fidget with this, which can be a lot of fun. And again, it just makes it a little bit more useful. I've got to wipe off my fingerprints here because that glossy ceramic can be a bit of a smudge magnet there. And of course, I do want to feature this in its full glory. Big shout out to Christopher Ward for sending this piece in for me to share with you all. It's a looker, guys, especially when you look at the way the dial has that glossiness. It all ties in very, very nicely. So also beautifully signed. Check this out. Very nicely signed crown, great size, great grip for the tactile engagement there. Beautifully guarded with the crown guards, which are a nice tight tolerance. There's not a lot of gaps. Look at that light catcher case. I love the undercuts, the bevels. You know, when we see Seiko do these types of things, we really praise them for being able to manufacture cases at such affordable prices. And I think now Christopher Ward has definitely stepped within that arena where you can just expect so much quality within the level of fit and finish in terms of the case, and that even extends into the bracelet. I mean, look at the flush fit screws there. But for the first time in a very long time, if not newer with this particular iteration, you're going to have a display case back, which is really cool. So now you can see that nice automatic Sellita SW200. It has 38-hour power reserve, beats at 4 hertz or 28,800 vibrations per hour in terms of that beat rate, and it is, you know, within the timing tolerances of plus or minus 20 seconds per day, which isn't the greatest. I mean, speaking of Seiko, right? It's not super fine-tuned, but I think a lot of people, of course, can appreciate the fact that, say, this versus something from the Swatch group within that might have an extended power reserve within that Powermatic line. You know, you can't do manual adjustments on it. Here you can still do manual adjustments in terms of if your watch is running slow or fast, or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, then you can just take it to a qualified watchmaker, and you don't have to find a specific service center and send it away or anything like that. So that's going to be one of those benefits similar to Seiko, where although the movements right out of the gate might not be the most, I guess, the high-end tolerances, of course every individual unit will vary in terms of how well it's going to keep time. And then the nice thing is it still does offer you room for manual adjustment if you do want to tighten everything up, if that's going to be a big deal breaker for you. Now, getting into some more of the details there, guys, the glossy dial with applied indices looks great. Date at 6 o'clock, of course, nicely color matched, and it has even a nice little painted frame, brushed and polished hands, so you're going to be able to ensure legibility because you're going to have multi finishes which are going to play with the light differently, whether it be holding the light on the satin brush side or reflecting the light with the high polish part. Now, the lume here is going to be grade X1 BLC1, so that just means that it's going to be the highest grade of Swiss Superluminova that there is, and it's going to glow blue, and it's going to be quite white in terms of the daylight legibility versus it having a bit of a green tint if you were going to have something that was going to be more like a C3. 30 atmospheres of water resistance, even with that display case back, which is very nice. Bracelet is all solid, even has quick release spring bars, and not just quick release spring bars, that's actually integrated and they feel like mechanical levers. It's not just a spring bar that they integrated into a standard end link. Even the end link is really optimized for you to take these on and off. And then you get into the bracelet. Now, while not fully articulated, which is a bit of a trend these days, it is nicely contoured, as you guys can see. So even though these are a little bit on the longer side, they do have a nice curvature to them, and you're also getting full on half links, and that's nice to see, especially because you do have a micro adjust clasp that does offer toolless micro adjust. Sometimes some brands will just leave that out of the equation, will leave the half links out of the equation because they say, oh, well, you could just dial it in with the clasp. Nice to have the versatility to do both here, or a combination, depending on how loose or tight you prefer to wear these particular bracelets. Now, the taper on here is very, very classic. It goes from 20 to about 16.2, and then the clasp width is 18.5. Nicely signed and milled, and you can see everything flows quite beautifully with the design of the links going into the clasp itself. So with all that said, let's actually get it on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay, guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, I think this wears absolutely perfectly. Look at how thin that profile is. Check that out. It just sinks beautifully into the wrist there. Let me get it to focus. Sorry about that. Ooh, there we go. Look at that thinness, guys. That cannot be undersold. I just want to make sure that you guys understand how this is going to lay. And again, it's not the ultimate thinness because it's 11.3 millimeters, which is still quite thin physically, but it's those cuts on the case. It's the slope and the angle on that bezel. It's also that flat sapphire crystal combining all together again to give you a wearing experience that really emphasizes that thinness. And the nice thing is now with this smaller size, it doesn't feel quite so expansive. It feels quite balanced. And of course, when I had my wrist a bit close to the lens, you're going to get some perspective distortion due to the focal length, and it's going to make the watch feel a lot larger than it actually is. So what I like to do is keep my wrist nice and low and then just tighten up the frame ever so slightly so we can just get a closer look, a nice detailed look, but just add a bit of a truer aspect ratio as to how this may lay on your own wrist. And check that out. Very, very nicely centered. I know 47.4 millimeters isn't extraordinarily short in terms of its lug to lug, especially considering it does have male end links. But when you look at this, look at the slope on the lugs and the case shape. Look at the slope on that male end link. That is actually very sharply done in terms of that center link protrusion that does come out. So it all flows very organically. It's not anything where there's a big flat space or gap underneath the wrist. So if you do have a smaller wrist, the nice thing is they do have smaller options available for you, but it just helps again with this 40 millimeter just feel perfect at 40 millimeters. So I dig that, and that's something that is a bit different as opposed to some of the previous iterations where they shrunk down the 40 and it just felt a little offset in terms of some of those proportions, whether it be the center links feeling a little bit overly wide, or the the lugs feeling overly narrow. Here everything just feels very, very dialed in and purposeful. But with that said, let's actually get it off the wrist, set up for some lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Ooh, check that out. That lume is absolutely outstanding, guys. And you can see it's a dive watch. It should be quite lumed. I know some of you might find that bezel insert to maybe be a little bit too busy with every marking at every 5 minutes, but I will say it's signature, right? It's something that has happened, and it's less of what some of those younger brands get out there and do in terms of just trying to be just different enough. I'm glad that they've kind of shed that and they're really about creating their own signature look and design. One thing I always like to work in is a bit of a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. And you guys can see, guys, this shade of blue is just outstanding. Check that out. It is very, very nice. Still renders quite blue, even a more of a midnight blue, blackish vibe when you're in very low light. But the nice thing is it never overpowers, never becomes, unserious or cartoony or, just overly specific in terms of the bright level of blue. So a nice, clean, deep blue that I think is very, very versatile. And you guys know I'm a big fan of blue divers, and look at how legible that is. You have great orientation at a glance. You see the double baton at 12 o'clock, and there you have it. You know where up is up and down is down now. So very, very nice, guys. Ooh. All right, so now you guys know I could probably talk about this piece for quite some time, but I'll try to gather my closing thoughts here. On the wrist, much improved proportions over their previous 600 meter Trident 40 millimeter variations. This finally achieves that perfect balance of ratios between dial, bezel, lugs, and bracelet that I've just really been looking for so many years. So in terms of model variants, again, this is available in 3 case sizes and 4 colors with the option of a redesigned bracelet, and 2 different bracelet options at that, or quick release straps, and there's tons of options on that front, and it's actually very configurable. I left a link down in the description so you guys can configure your own kind of perfect Trident C60. In terms of comparable models, guys, more this really just has more in common with watches that cost double. Think mainstream Swiss, guys, because this is definitely more along those lines. No, it's not COC certified, but a lot of those watches are not. They're starting to move that direction. They're starting to move a little bit more into in-house, but all those prices are going up. So something like this, I think, still makes quite a case in terms of the value proposition. So for me, guys, the bottom line, the $1,000 premium diver space is more competitive than it's ever been. And the C60 Trident has been a value to quality ratio benchmark for well over 10 years now. I mean, it's been in the game much longer than that, near 20 years at this point. But I mean, it's kind of been, again, it's set the bar, not too long ago, and it's just stayed there, and I can appreciate that. So in 2024, this current iteration has achieved a more finalized feel that no longer requires any big updates, and really treads the closest to iconic and timeless as the brand has ever ventured within this product line. So that's what I really dig about it. Before there was a bit of a planned obsolescence between each iteration of Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3, and you just kind of had to it's like phones. You wanted the newer one because it was the best one. And now they've matured into a brand to where, hey, maybe the newer one just has a slight visual or design tweak that you just don't like, but it's still going to offer everything that you do like in terms of those specifications, in terms of having that quick adjust bracelet, having ceramic, having display, that has Swiss made aspect, just everything, all the way around. It just has all of those features that now you don't have to give up. So at this point, we might be looking back a couple of years on this piece and this being quite collectible because it'll still have that DNA, but it'll also still hold up in terms of modern specs. So with that said, let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please do a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.